that the Navy knows more about radiation probably than any other agency in the United States. It certainly knows an awful lot. And they also have the nuclear submarines, and they carry most of the nuclear weapons on their ships, both submarines and surface ships. So it seems reasonable to assume that the Navy is very, very knowledgeable about radiation. Now, I worked at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory for 5 years, which is above the UC Berkeley campus in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that was in the end of the 1970s. I left in 1981, and then in 1989 I went out to the Leuren Moret Nuclear Weapons Laboratory and worked there for 2 years, and that's where I really started to understand what nuclear weapons are about, although I didn't know anything about radiation then. It was on a trip to Japan in the year of 2000 when I was invited to speak at the plenary session of the Atomic and Hydrogen Bomb Conference in Japan. And that's where I began to understand the horror of nuclear weapons and the reality of what we're doing to our entire planet. I came back after I had visited the Hiroshima and the Nagasaki Peace Museums. And the Japanese have worked very, very hard for over 50 years to educate the global population about radiation, about nuclear weapons, and about the horror of being the only country bombed in warfare with nuclear weapons. Now, they only were bombed with 2 bombs. The little boy was the bomb dropped on Hiroshima in 1945 on August the 6th. That was a uranium bomb. And about a few days later, the United States military dropped Fat Man on Nagasaki, and that was a plutonium bomb. So in reality, the Japanese had already lost the war. They'd already offered to surrender. I think they offered to Switzerland to surrender maybe 4 or 5 months before the bombs were dropped on Japan, and they were not allowed to surrender because our nuclear bombs were not ready to be dropped on Japan. In reality, the dropping of the bombs was to experiment with those bombs and to warn Russia not to mess with the United States because we had these horrific weapons. Going back to the San Francisco Bay Area, it's an extremely radioactive environment. It's been polluted from the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, activities on the UC Berkeley campus, the Naval Radiological Defense Lab, even Stanford, the SLAC experimental apparatus is exposing the population in the city of Palo Alto who live along the SLAC. It's got a very long accelerator path, and people living at the end of that accelerator are being exposed as well as along it to particles that are spalling out of the accelerator. So we also are being contaminated in the Bay Area. We get almost all of our drinking water out of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And I discovered a couple of years ago a paper in the Journal of Environmental Radioactivity, which was published in 2002. And I suddenly understood why there's so much breast cancer in the Bay Area, particularly Marin County. The Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, where I worked, did a very expensive and a very in-depth study measuring radiocesium in North San Francisco Bay and Baja California coastal surface waters. And what this told me is that the Leuren Moret Laboratory and the University of California, who's been the manager for 61 years, is fully aware of the environmental contamination from their radioactive activities at the Nevada Test Site and the Leuren Moret Nuclear Weapons Laboratory. And what has happened is that the radiation that was rained out and snowed out into the Sierras, not only from the Nuclear Weapons Laboratory, the Navy Radiological Defense Lab in the Bay Area, San Francisco, but also Chernobyl, and most importantly is that the Rancho Seco nuclear power plant at the foot of the Sierras, right outside of Sacramento, was operating until 1989, and 95% of the radioactive emissions were rained out and snowed out into the Sierras. So the legacy of all of that Cold War activity and the nuclear power plant in Sacramento, it has had a terrible impact on the Bay Area public health. And this is also true around nuclear power plants around the world, nuclear weapons laboratories and facilities around the world. And I'll explain that later with the breast cancer map, which clearly shows the low-level radiation from all of these activities, whether it's nuclear power plants, testing of depleted uranium weapons, or nuclear weapons facilities. It is having a devastating effect on public health, not only in the United States, but globally. Why do we have nuclear weapons? Nuclear weapons basically are being used as nuclear blackmail. And if you look at this very important book, The Naked Nuclear Emperor, by Commander Robert Greene, British Navy commander who was in charge of all the nuclear submarines, and at some point he had a moment of conscience and he came to his senses and has now gone around the world speaking and writing against nuclear weapons because it's so horrific. We can't use them without contaminating the whole planet. This map in his book is very, very telling, and this shows the nuclear states in the northern hemisphere and the fact very clearly that the southern hemisphere is a nuclear-free weapons zone. The nuclear weapons program has allowed us to have a very, very large economy and to acquire tremendous wealth in our country. But that nuclear weapons program and all of that Cold War activity developing these horrific weapons did not come at a low price. And this is the executive summary of the Department of Energy, March 1995,